Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, DEI Bootcamp for Communicators, Closing Conversation and Reflections. We're thrilled to have you join us. My name is Crystal Board. I work at Vanguard Communications. I'm a vice president there, as well as leading our diversity, equity, inclusion practice. And I will be your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, I want to share a few housekeeping notes. First, this webinar is being recorded. Also, the opinions expressed by the panelists are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of their respective organizations. Also, throughout the webinar, we will have closed captioning available through Zoom, as well as live American Sign Language interpretation provided by UNO Translations to support participants experiencing hearing loss. If you have any questions or comments, please add them in the chat as the webinar goes on. Many of you are joining this conversation because you participated in our DEI Bootcamp for Communicators. So we hope that you had a wonderful experience. Over those 11 business days, you received a daily email from Vanguard about DEI communications. And we hope this learning experience provided information, insights, and resources to help you elevate your DEI communication skills and approaches. But if you didn't have a chance to participate, there's still a chance to gain the value of those insights we shared over the boot camp. If you scan the QR code on your screen using your phone or a tablet device, or visit the URL displayed on the screen, you will see all of the emails that we shared in archive form for you to review. Recommend starting with day 1 and working through the last day because the lessons kind of build on each other. And if you've enjoyed the information and resources you've received from us so far, we welcome you to join our quarterly e-newsletter list to stay further in the know, and you can sign up using the URL that's displayed on the screen. So before we go on, we want to hear from you. So especially if you participated in the DEI Bootcamp for Communicators. So please take out your phone and a tablet device. And you can either scan the QR code on the screen or go to menti.com and enter the code that's displayed. And what we want to hear is for you to share a word or short phrase that captures your biggest takeaway from the DEI Bootcamp for Communicators series. So something that really stood out to you, that was really memorable, made you see something differently, and go ahead and add that, and we're going to see what people experienced in a word cloud that will be populating on the screen. So we'll give a few minutes for folks to participate. So it could be one word or a phrase that comes to mind. Great, mindful word choice. Listen to others, work to do, accessible, nuanced, intentions, meaningful, wonderful. Looks like people took a lot of different information and insights away from the experience. That makes us so happy. Amazing. So you can keep adding to the word cloud if you like as we go along. But first, we wanted to kind of review very quickly some of the insights that we shared over the course of the DEI Bootcamp for Communicators. We're doing especially for those who maybe didn't have a chance to participate. So first, do no harm. So thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, really having a deeper understanding of what those words mean and how it applies to the work that we do as communicators. Number 2, beware the silent message disruptors. So really thinking about unconscious bias and microaggressions and how we can minimize them or even eliminate them from the work. Number 3, intersectionality, the multidimensional maven. So intersectionality may have been a new concept for you, but it can be incredibly helpful when thinking about audience segmentation and how our understanding of our identities can be very layered and intersecting. 4, the DEI crisis statement. make it matter. So it's not about damage control, it's about communicating genuine commitment. And if that is not the most relevant thing to do, then don't issue the statement. Number 5, people first content, words matter. So the use of inclusive language can communicate our respect and representation for the identity communities and audiences that we're engaging, making sure everyone's a part of the conversation. Number 6, active allyship beyond the basics. So real allies don't just cheer from the sidelines, everyone, they get in the game. And there's lots of ways that we can show up and show out as allies and to help others be seen, heard, and valued. Number 7, inclusion beyond the rainbow. So when thinking about our LGBTQ plus community members, is thinking beyond just the Pride Month and thinking beyond the rainbow and really coming up with and implementing ways that their voices and representation is present year round. 8, combating ageism, valuing age. So regardless of what generation you identify as, everyone brings something to the table, and this is a way of honoring that and making sure that that representation and those voices are being heard. Number 9, disability inclusivity. Accessibility is key. So it's important, it's not just an add-on, it is a must-have. Number 10, keep storytelling real. So authenticity in storytelling is like a good cup of coffee. It keeps things real and invigorates the conversation. So, and knowing the difference between being a story facilitator versus a storyteller is also so important. And we shared a bonus lesson, which was about DEI style guides and how they can be a blueprint for your DEI communications efforts. So it's something that can help with consistency and be a way to align respect in representation in your communication across team members and across organizations. So that's our top 11 reflections of this year's DEI Bootcamp for Communicators. If you want to take a screenshot or take a photo of this so you can keep it with you as a reference, please do. You can also scan the QR code, and that will take you directly to the archive of each of these emails on our website. All right. But now let's transition to the exciting part of today's webinar. So we want to get our conversation started. So I'm pleased to introduce Maria Rodriguez, Vanguard President and CEO, who will guide us through this next part of our session. For more than 35 years, Maria has led a talented staff at Vanguard to advance social change and champion causes to help protect the health and well-being of our planet and its people. She's widely recognized as a top woman in PR and an inductee in several Communications Hall of Fame. And she dedicates enormous amounts of time to causes and organizations near and dear to her heart, including this conversation today about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with that, welcome, Maria.
Thank you, Crystal. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to welcome everyone. I've really been looking forward to this conversation, and we have an incredible panel we've put together. These are 2 former Vanguard team members, and they now work with organizations that are addressing social and justice issues in our communities, and they apply a DEI lens to their work on a daily basis. So first, I'd like to welcome Elaine de Leon Ahn, who is the Communications Director for the social justice advocacy organization, Roderick and Solange MacArthur Justice Center. When Elaine worked at Vanguard as an account manager, she helped launch the Get Ahead of Stroke campaign to improve systems of care for stroke patients and educate the public about stroke symptoms and the importance of early intervention. For the MacArthur Justice Center, Elaine oversees the organization's communication strategy, media relations, digital outreach, issue-based campaigns, thought leadership, and partnerships. With over 15 years of experience in advocacy and communications, she's developed and managed campaigns for social change, focusing on issues such as healthcare access, education, immigration, women's rights, inequality, criminal justice, and human rights, all amazing issues. Her previous roles include leading communications at the Tahrir Justice Center, Young Invincibles, the Institute for Policy Studies, and the Death Penalty Information Center. Elaine is a steering committee member of the Progressive Communicators of DC, also known as PCDC, and has taught at American University School of Communications. She holds a master's in strategic communications from American University and a master's in theological studies from Wesley Theological Seminary. Thanks for being here, Elaine.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Next, I'd like to welcome Stephanie Dukes to the panel. Stephanie serves as a communications officer at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, where she plays a pivotal role in advancing the foundation's mission to promote thriving children, working families, and equitable communities. Through strategic collaboration with internal and external stakeholders, Stephanie designs and implements campaigns, including the National Day of Racial Healing initiative, that position the Kellogg Foundation as a leader in transforming systems impacting children's and their families' lives. She's responsible for shaping communication strategies that advance racial equity, community engagement, and leadership development, core elements known as the Foundation's DNA. As the messaging architect for the National Day of Racial Healing, Stephanie engages major media partners and expands community-based observances nationwide. Before joining Kellogg, Stephanie was an associate director at Vanguard and managed multi-million-dollar contracts with federal agencies. Prior to her career in PR, Stephanie worked as a television news anchor and reporter. She holds a Bachelor of Journalism from the University of Texas at Austin and is a member of the Public Relations Society of America and the National Association of Black Journalists. Welcome, Stephanie. We're so happy you could join us.
Thank you, Maria. Delighted to be here.
Great. I feel like we're having a mini Vanguard reunion. But let's dive in. I often think that we learn more from the challenges that we experience. So I'd love to kick off with what's been challenging in aligning your communication strategies with core DEI principles. Elaine, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can jump in. So for me, I think the biggest challenge has been the idea of slowing down. As communicators, we are always, most of the time, I guess, not always, working in deadline-driven contexts, or maybe we're doing rapid response on behalf of our organizations and our clients. And I think doing DEI with intentionality, being deliberate in what your impact is and not just your intention, right? Because we know that there's a difference. It's really making sure that doing it right, slowing down is a key, because, you know, it might, you might have really good intentions, but you can still execute it poorly and still do the harm that you're trying to avoid. And so what that might mean is that you might need to add a couple of steps to your review process. You might have to involve maybe more decision makers at the beginning of planning a campaign. And I think as folks who are in the communications profession, and we like our deadlines, we like fast turnaround in some situations, or the context necessitate it. Sometimes the muscle of slowing down is a little bit out of practice for us, and having to practice that in the context of DEI is really important.
That's a really great point. It might take a little bit longer, but it's going to be worthwhile in the end.
Exactly. Yeah.
How about you, Stephanie?
Yeah, I really love what you say, Elaine, about slowing down. A colleague of mine talks about we slow down to go fast. And so the idea is that you lean into intentionality in addressing that challenge. I think another challenge that I would lift up is two-pronged. First, the building of relationships internally and externally that will enrich your work as it pertains to diversity, equity, inclusion, or anything else that we do as communication strategists. Because that does that, and that's linked to the slow down to go fast piece, right? It takes time to do that. It takes time, it takes patience. And so that's an ongoing challenge that you're always working to address, knowing that it's always a work in progress. The other thing that I would lift up is, and this is what building relationships does in informing DEI work, is being able to address your blind spots. First of all, recognizing that you have them as a comm strategist, no matter where you sit in terms of your identity, knowing that you have them, and not making that a personal issue, not beating yourself up about it, or being in denial about it, any of those things, but really engaging it authentically, knowing that you are human, you are going to make mistakes, you do not know everything. Your experience is not the sum total of all experiences. And so recognizing that and reminding yourself of that. I hate to put it necessarily in the framing of a challenge, but it is something to be worked on, and so that makes it a challenge because it directly impacts the way we show up as communicators and story facilitators and strategists and all the things that we do as part of this profession.
Actually brings up, it's a perfect transition to my next question, which is that, we all have unconscious bias, right? And if unconscious bias and microaggressions show up in our work, it's going to get in the way of us reaching the people we're trying to reach. So I'm curious, in your work, how do you identify and mitigate for unconscious bias and microaggressions in the communications work that you're doing?
Do you want me to jump? I can jump into
Sure.
that. I think this is a great question, and certainly something that I, as a director, part of my role is that sometimes I'm the final approver of things that are going externally, right? And so I think really a lot of it is what Stephanie said, self-learning and self-reflection, understanding what your own biases are, understanding your blind spots or weak spots, knowing that you might be the last pair of eyes that sees something before it goes out into the world, will allow you to do the work of learning, whatever it is that you need to learn to mitigate or counteract those. Or maybe if you know what those gaps are in your own perspectives and your own lived experience, it gives you an opportunity to say, I need to seek somebody, with this perspective or this experience, so that there's expertise that you might be lacking, but that expertise is accounted for. I think there's also a way of you need to look around the group that's making the decision and being intentional about understanding what perspectives and experiences are not being represented here, and finding people, or maybe, obviously you need to avoid tokenizing. You can't ask people to speak, for broad swaths of experiences and communities, but if finding expertise of people who can share with you those perspectives and insights, making sure that you're filling in those gaps, I think are really important in terms of making sure your communications are aligning with your intention and the values that you have as an organization.
That's great. Stephanie, did you want to add anything there? Oh, you're on mute.
This is the story of my life. Of course.
I know.
I think that I definitely concur with everything that Elaine just shared, and especially that piece about not looking around the room and seeing who's missing. I have the good and great privilege of working as part of the work that we do at the Kellogg Foundation with Linda Sarsour, who some of you may know, be familiar with, as she was one of the main and key organizers of the Women's March. And she talks about this a lot. She's very much a grassroots organizer and activist. And she mentions this a lot in terms of however she's organizing, in whatever space she's organizing, planning, strategizing. She's always looking around the room to see who is not there, who has a stake in this, but yet we don't see them in this room, and then and how we can engage those folks so that we can make sure that whatever unconscious biases might be minefields in the road, that we can catch them before we step on them. knowing that it's a collective effort. I think that's another thing that's important for us to recognize too, is that while certainly we all have our individual responsibilities in this space, we have to have enough humility to recognize that we can't do it all on our own. And so there's a collectivism that needs to come into play when it comes to addressing issues of unconscious bias and the way that it impacts our work.
I'm so glad you used the word humility, because I feel like that's really at the core of this, is that, sometimes there's pressure on us as communicators to have all the answers. And it's really important to take a step back and be humble about the fact that, we can't possibly speak for all of our audiences. So I'm really glad you brought that up. I'm going to move into something that I think all of us have dealt with, either in-house or with clients, where they've asked us, we want to release a statement in response to a crisis. And there has been no shortage of DEI crises in the last few years. Police brutality, other acts of violence, incredibly hurtful policies and legislation that's passed for our communities. So I would love to hear what your approach is to determining if you need to respond. What are the considerations for responding with a statement from your organizations? Who wants that one first? Stephanie?
I can jump on that because it's fresh in my mind for a few different reasons. Last year, we went through, by we, I mean we at the Kellogg Foundation, I know that other organizations are doing the same thing. We went through a whole revamp of the criteria for response, and as well as, the narrative framing for responses as they align with our mission, which is focusing on the health and well-being of children, and families. Children live in families, families live in communities. And so it took us quite a bit of time, because it wasn't a muscle that the Kellogg Foundation was used to using or flexing, making public statements, determining whether or not it was appropriate to make a public statement based on this issue or this news item or that news or that story in the news. And so the impulse was anything that was remotely adjacent to our mission and values, especially as it pertains to issues of racial equity and racial healing, as well as how that intersects with the lives of children and families. The impulse was to jump in and release a statement about everything. And we had to take a step back and say, wait a minute, we can't speak to everything, and we shouldn't speak to everything. And so, how do we work together as comms team members in partnership with our programmatic colleagues to create a criteria for response that is in alignment with our mission and values, and gives us the opportunity to talk about the impact on children and families, whatever this is, knowing that touches a lot of settings and topics. And in what form will we respond? We decide, okay, we're going to issue a statement. It doesn't always have to be a statement that we post on our website and push through PR Newswire and do all the things. That there are stages, depending on alignments, depending on adjacency or intersection with our mission and values, that if we choose to make a response, maybe we issue something brief on social media. Maybe we issue an image with some language, or a video of some kind on social across our different platforms. There are a lot of different ways to do it, once you decide that that's what's appropriate. But having a criteria is important, criteria as well as narrative, obviously. But then the other thing I will say is equally as important is having the discipline to stick to that criteria and to stick to that language. Because often our best intentions, we get very excited, very passionate about things, and everybody else is talking about it, right? And we want to make sure that we show up in this space, and that the communities that we serve show up as part of this conversation as well, in the ways that we can support them in doing that. And it's very easy to veer off that criteria because we're so excited, we're so passionate. So that's what I would lift up is part of the journey as well.
That's great,
Yeah.
because it's true, when everyone else is responding, then is that knee-jerk reaction that we need to be in there too. Why aren't we part of this conversation? And it might not be the most authentic way to converse with your audience, frankly. So Elaine, I'm sure you have some.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything that Stephanie said. I actually, I'm thinking about the questions, you know, in the organization that we asked, and it has to do with how much is this aligned? How much is this impact related, you know, of this crisis related to the core of our mission? And do you have unique expertise, or is there a perspective that you have on this that's related to the work that you do, right? Like how are you what is the ground and that you're standing on in terms of releasing this? I just want to add two things, I think, to what Stephanie said. It's okay to opt out if that is the right thing to do. And I, in fact, with organizations, we would go through the criteria, feel like we have something to say. And I can't tell you how many times the comms team has written the statement and then we read it and we go, oh, there's not actually value add here. Let's just scrap it, instead of doing something that might actually be harmful or, you know, fall on a negative way. The other thing I think is something that Stephanie started to allude to, which is like, are the values that you're putting out externally aligned with your values internally? Because it's really, sometimes it's easy to forget that your own staff are actually a stakeholder to your external messaging. And if you're putting out something as an organization that is not aligned with what the people on your staff are experiencing about what's true to your work culture, they will call you out on that externally too, right? So I think making sure that there's alignment there, and that it is part of your values and that you're kind of walking the talk, as well, is also really important.
And on that note of walking the talk, you know, being able to share in that statement or whatever it is that you're doing, how you're walking the talk. Because I know we're going to talk about a little bit later on. We're going to, I believe, touch on issues of allyship and how that shows up authentically or not. And I think often the challenge is when your organization doesn't have stories and actions to back up what you're saying in that statement. That's, for us, that's another issue in terms of that criteria. You know, is there a story that we can tell? Is there an alignment in our work that we can make with this issue, that we can reference in that statement that shows that we're walking the talk?
I'm curious, you've both mentioned the, you know, like sort of that internal audience that, you know, your staff, your board, your other stakeholders might be expecting a statement or not expecting it. And I'm just curious, do you have any examples where you have had backlash from one of those very important internal audiences, really, right? Like employees or a board, about either the communication you did do or the fact that you didn't do it, and, you know, that you could share with us?
I can share an example. So I think there was an organization that I worked for that focused a lot on gender-based violence, and it took a little bit of bringing the audience along when we started incorporating messages around LGBTQ and trans violence. And it's not to say that people disagreed with it from a values perspective. It's just that what we found was that we needed to be more explicit about the fact that the violence that LGBTQ and trans people experience is a form of gender-based violence. We kind of had to make that connection with them. And I think like once we were able to say, yeah, this is within our mission, we work on gender-based violence, you know, we're anti-gender-based violence as an organization. Once we kind of made that connection much more explicit, our audiences came along. But I think it was because it was a new way of messaging our work, there was a little bit of like, why are you talking about this? You know, like your main audiences are not necessarily LGBTQIA communities, but it was a moment where you couldn't talk about gender-based violence and kind of leave that out of the conversation without really being insensitive to, those communities. So I think
Sure.
that was part of the consideration there.
Sure. Stephanie, any of you had to deal with any backlash?
Not too much in my experience, my most recent experience. I think part of it goes back to that criteria piece. Within our criteria, we get buy-in. We do our best to get buy-in internally before we go out with anything externally, and that includes our programmatic colleagues, as well as the board, as well as other members of leadership,
Sure.
to the extent that it makes sense. And so I think that's one thing that has, like I said, in my most recent work with the Kellogg Foundation, has helped kind of avoid that.
Yeah. You were talking about talking the walk, and I'm curious, around when we talk about allyship, I'd like to talk a little bit about how you differentiate between like performative allyship or genuine allyship.
I think,
Go
ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I think what's really interesting about this is that somebody said something really compelling and very memorable. And they said that performative allyship is something that you can label yourself being, when authentic allyship is somebody from that community that you're claiming to be an ally, actually recognizes you as an ally. And so I think it kind of goes back to are you walking the walk of your values? Is that are you making the impact that you are intending to have? Are the folks that you're saying you're an ally of seeing that in you and your actions, and are they validating that? Because I think there's so many ways, I could say I'm an ally of all of these communities, but if those communities don't find me as a partner and don't find me as a supportive ally, does it really matter what I do, right? I'm probably actually doing harm if they don't see me as an ally and I'm going around places saying that I am. So I think that it's who is defining you as an ally? Is it you defining yourself and saying that this is who you are, or are the folks in the community that you're trying to support seeing you as one?
That's great. Stephanie.
Absolutely, completely agree. And I think that, allyship is the way that you show up when the cameras are off. It's very easy to show up, and I think that this is part of the point that you're making, Elaine. It's very easy to position yourself as an ally when everybody's looking to you to be that. And it's a different thing when there's nobody around to see you. There's nobody around to perform for, right? That's when it becomes an issue of whether or not you're living your values authentically. And I think specifically as it pertains to DEI and comms, it's very easy, and this is, an allyship tie. So bear with me for a second. I think it's very easy to reduce allyship to a set of practices, rules, buzzwords, all of those things. We saw that happen in 2020, following the murder of George Floyd and the whole issue of police violence against communities of color, particularly Black communities, in that story. And it kept repeating itself as each, deeply and profoundly tragic incident happened. Philando Castile, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, all of those folks we saw this explosion of communication, external communication from all of these different organizations, corporate, multinational corporate entities, so on and so forth. I'll never forget the black square that everybody started putting up on their socials, if folks remember that. And those organizations that were putting up that black square in their tweets or in their, their Twitter profile or their Instagram profile or whatever, they were getting called out by others who knew that they were not walking the walk. And so I think that avoiding the temptation to reducing this work to a set of rules when that certainly has its place, but at the same time, making sure that when nobody's looking, you're also doing the internal work individually and organizationally around the principles that are embedded in DEI. How am I reflecting on myself in terms of my own identities, the space in which the space in which I might have privilege based on, different sort of identities that I carry, spaces that I absolutely do not have privilege based on the identities that I carry. What does that story mean? And because that informs how I show up as a human, but it also informs how I show up as a communication strategist. And within organizations, it shows up as well. That real self-examination, I think, is what really sits beneath the allyship. That self-examination, those ongoing journeys, personally as well as organizationally. There's one organization who's a grantee partner of ours called Axis. And they are an organization that focuses on supporting the health and well-being of Arab American communities and Muslim American communities. And I think they're a great example because we actually featured them in a series that we created of what we call racial equity spotlights. And they talked about their own internal journey as an organization. And addressing their biases, addressing anti-Blackness within their communities, while at the same time trying to stand in solidarity with Black communities. And so all of those things I think are part of the puzzle.
I feel like we're constantly coming back to the need to be humble. We don't have all the answers. And I just, how do you show up when the cameras are off? I love that. So I'm going to move to audience questions because we had over 100 people sign up for this webinar, which is really great. It shows, how important this topic is and how much interest there is in learning more, because we are all in a position where we can keep learning more. So we got lots of questions from all these folks as well, and we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I want to make sure we get to a few. So here's one. While the end goal may be to diversify, how can we most effectively make a business case for corporate diversity?
I can jump in on that.
Okay.
I have two thoughts, and I think one maybe a little bit contradictory to the other. The first is that there are a number of studies already out there, business articles, stuff that, based on evidence-based things have made the case, right, for the fact that diversity is profitable, it's good for business. When there are different perspectives at the table, these things tell you, it fuels innovation. The problem solving is better because you're coming at it from a lot of different experiences and perspectives, talent retention, you're reaching broader audiences, all of these things. All of this is great. The second thought I have is, I think we need to stop approaching it from a this is good for business perspective. I think we need to stop seeing the people in our organizations, our corporations, just for the labor that they give you, right? Value them as humans. And so I think framing it from the this is good for business is not necessarily a helpful narrative, because when it stops being good for business, does that mean you deprioritize DEI? That's probably, what'll happen. And so I think these are people work, in your organization, your coworkers are full people, your workforce are full people. They deserve to feel included. They deserve to feel belonging. I think I read somewhere that 1/3 of our lives we're spending at work. That's a lot of time people are giving you, building community with you in your work culture. And I think the least companies owe these folks who are, making sure their business is running is feeling inclusion and belonging, while they're doing that work. So there's lots of great conversation out there about why this is really good. I would also love to see us move away from just framing it as like, it's good for business.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Stephanie, do you have anything you want to add there? Or?
No, Elaine really did say
Said
it
it
all.
really well.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. The only thing that I would add is that that's another indicator of that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Taking people from that continuum of, the priority is that this is good for business to move them along the continuum going forward. This is good for humanity. This is right. This is the right thing to do for all different kinds of reasons. Business might just be one of them, but should it be primary? It's culturally, that's a long lead cultural shift.
Right.
That is you've got to be in for the long haul.
So this is a perfect segue to another question that's in here. So Stephanie, I want to see what you have to say here. What's your advice on how to deliver meaningful internal communications to help shift the corporate culture to support DEI?
I think you have to meet folks where they are. It all goes back to that when you're talking about, internal, making that internal shift is the internal audiences. And really being able to speak with them and listen to them, and engage them in a way, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we're all moved by similar things, not the same thing, but similar things. We all want to be seen, heard. We all want to be, we want our humanity honored. We want to be respected. We want to be valued. And so I think that in terms of beginning that internal journey, it really, for me, is, and again, this is something that we support organizations in doing, and I can share a whole sort of resource of different examples of this, but really talking with people and finding out what it is that what really matters to them internally, and showing them how what matters to them aligns with what matters to the common good, from a honoring and recognizing and relationship building between people, from that perspective, and know that it's not going to happen in one conversation. It's not going to happen in 10 conversations. It's an ongoing listening, engaging, seeking to understand, turning to wonder. Something else that a colleague of mine says a lot. I wonder why this person is so invested in this particular thing. And once people understand that, yes, you do hear them, yes, you do respect them, yes, you are interested in their perspective, then they're going to be more open to listening to, what you're trying to suggest to them, or what you're asking them to consider.
It's really to take, like a marketing approach to it, right? Like in marketing, we would want to, identify our audiences, identify what barriers there are for them to change their behavior or change their understanding or change their attitudes. So it's really, and it doesn't happen overnight. So I think that's a great way to look at it. It's going to take some time, but it's worth it. Elaine, did you have something you wanted to say there?
I think just to affirm that the listening is really important. I think it's fair to say that a lot of DEI efforts will fail if it's top down, right? Like the leadership needs to listen to where your staff is feeling the inequity, are, instead of saying, we're going to have a DEI initiative and it's going to be X, Y, and Z, and not give people a chance to say, actually, here's where I'm experiencing inequality, in this workplace. And so I think the listening piece is really, really important.
Sure. Here's another question. What are some things to watch out for as the DEI language is removed and the more general HR language is substituted? So I'm thinking this is reacting to, you know, the backlash that DEI in general is getting. And so a lot of folks are still continuing the efforts, right, and trying to live those values in how they operate, but they've had to remove, you know, any mention or any reference to it at all. So what are some things to watch out for?
I think one of the things to watch out for is the impulse to allow being safe to be the driver for everything that you do. You know, obviously there are legal realities associated with this. And nobody wants to get sued. I mean, let's just have real talk. No one gets, there's a risk that is associated with this, the way that we talk about this work, and way organizations talk about this work. But I think that it's also, there's also an impulse to let safety or be the primary motivation, or to kind of lead with fear, and let that be the driver. And I think this is a structural thing, right, that goes beyond communications. And certainly communications is integrated with this, but in my learnings on this is that it's structural. And so being really clear on what you can and cannot say, and not making assumptions about what you can and cannot say, I think is important. And that takes partnership with legal folks who, you know, who are experts at assessing risk, but also legal folks who are litigators and who understand, okay, this is what you actually can do. This is what you actually can say. So don't make assumptions. I think it's that assumptions piece that can be, that's something to watch out for, as well as, like I said, kind of leading with that fear-based motivation is something to watch out for too. Because that then rolls things back even further in practice than the attacks on racial equity could ever do on their own. Basically, those who would attack racial equity, from where I sit, when you're leading with fear, you're doing their job for them.
Yeah, it's good. I have a question here that I'm just thrilled this question came through. How can we, as a community of communicators, continue to support each other in advancing DEI goals?
I can jump in. So I think the theme has been humility, right? That we don't know everything all the time. And I think, but if there are enough people and expertise in the room, likely there's somebody who has expertise in the thing that you don't know. And so I think just being generous and connecting with folks who can kind of, you know, have a little bit of a brain trust or something, who you can reach out to and have questions around. I'll, since we mentioned PCDC, I'll kind of just give a shout out. It's like, you know, having a community who are generous about resources that they have. I think we talked a little bit about DEI style guides. One of the first DEI style guides that I ever worked on within an organization was inspired by resources that I was seeing on listservs that are being shared around. So I think tapping into a wealth of knowledge that's already out there, and knowing that, you know, I have my own limitations on things that I know, and I know what I don't know, and just being connected to people who know those things and not being afraid to ask for help. And when you are asked, you know, being generous with the knowledge that you have, instead of maybe feeling a little bit, I don't know, cagey or proprietary about some, I mean, you probably have to be proprietary if there's some intellectual property kind of stuff, but, you know, just like being in a mode of learning and being in a community of learning, I think is really important, especially on this topic.
Really speaks to the value of networking you know, with people that do what we do, right? I mean, that's why organizations like PCDC, Washington Women in PR, PRSA, it's really, those are great platforms for people to talk through and support each other. So I wanted to just ask one last question of you, which is there anything else, you know, I'm looking at the clock, so is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you feel that our participants today should really know, or, you know, take away with them? Stephanie, unmute.
Unmute. I just want to add something, or add to what Elaine just said about community of learning. I think that there's also an opportunity to lean into those communities of emotional support. Because very often those of us who are doing this work, doing DEI work, are also representative of the communities who are most impacted by that work, and the need, and the most impacted by inequities, and whether they be racial inequities, gender-based inequities, you know, ability-based inequities, all of this, or all the different sort of identities that people carry. And I think it's also helpful to your own, getting back to that personal experience and personal journey, to really create the trusted circle of other comms pros who are not, but who share your identity, or identities, who you can really lean into from not only that learning perspective as a comms professional, but also to just say, you know what, as a Black woman in this space, I am struggling. You know, this is hard. Writing that next statement about this individual who's from my community and shares my identity, who has been brutalized in some way. You know, writing a statement about that is costing me, you know, emotionally. Being able to be vulnerable about that, but then lean into that same support system for support through that process, I think strengthens the work as well.
That's so true. I think the thing that I'll add is like, complexity is inevitable, right? And so if you are serious about prioritizing DEI work, it's not enough that you're like prepared for complexity, or like you're accepting it, you're tolerating it as a part of the work. I think you have to like take a posture that you're embracing complexity, because that's the point. Like, if you're inviting a diverse set of perspectives, that means there's not going to be unanimous agreement on any one decision. That, you know, you're probably going to have to work through some things. You're going to have some healthy discomfort and healthy disagreements. And so I think folks who come into like really wanting to do DEI work right may not, I would encourage you to really come in with eyes wide open, that like complexity will be a part of it, discomfort will be a part of it. We've already said failure will be a part of you. It's not a matter of if you're going to make a mistake at some point, it's a when, and then you figure it out, you learn from it, and you do better next time. But that shouldn't stop you, you know, from wading into the discomfort and the complexity, because that's the thing that you need to get better at this thing.
That's great. Absolutely. 100%. Well, I want to thank you both, Elaine and Stephanie, for all of your contributions and your experience and your willingness to be on this with us. I'm so grateful. It's been a great conversation. I hope our audience feels that way. And I think we could keep talking about this for hours. But instead, I am going to turn it back to Crystal to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria. Wow, what an incredible conversation. I was taking furious notes during from all the answers and experience that was shared. So wonderful. We'd like to, this webinar was called Closing Conversation and Reflection. So we want to take one more moment with you, the participants, to reflect once again in a word cloud. And so if you could pick up that phone again or tablet or open that web browser, the thing we'd like to hear about is share with us one word or short phrase that captures an insight from the DEI Bootcamp of Communicators. It could be from the email series or from today's conversation that you're going to apply to your work today, your communications work today. So what was something, because we wanted, when we created the DEI Bootcamp for Communicators email series, we wanted it to be not only educational, but actionable, things that we gave you ideas and insights, a different way of looking at things that you could apply to your communications work right now. So share with us in the word cloud a word or short phrase that captures something that stayed with you for an insight that you're going to be applying to your work. Great. Alignment. Authentic. We heard a lot about alignment in our conversation today with Stephanie and Elaine. Wonderful. Opting out is okay. Great. Humility. Creating a community of learning. Wonderful. Great. Well, please feel free to continue sharing your words and short phrases with us. But with that, I'm going to turn it back to Maria to share with us her final reflection. Maria?
Thank you, Crystal. First, I really want to thank the team at Vanguard that put this whole thing together, especially to Crystal Board, who's been our host, and Leilani Clark, who has been sharing on the chat. They, in particular, poured a lot of themselves, a lot of energy into the bootcamp, and I'm really grateful. I think they both did a phenomenal job. The format for this series, I also want to give a shout out to the local chapter of the United Way, because that's who inspired us to use the email format. A few of us had participated in a 21-day racial equity journey that they had done a couple of years ago, and we loved that easily digestible learning format. And so we thought, well, let's apply it here. Now, why did we even think to do this? We've not normally done something like this for, kind of the our friends, family, colleagues, our networks. Well, it's because, like we've talked about today, DEI in so many different forms has been under attack, and we wanted to do something that we thought would be helpful to our profession. We hope that you found it useful and appreciate the feedback that you've shared with us to date. We will be keeping the bootcamp content on the website so that you can reference it back or you can share it out to others. And then I just want to say that DEI has been part of our work at Vanguard really from the very beginning. And I just can't even imagine trying to achieve social change without factoring in DEI values and principles. Our profession is about understanding people, what drives them, what motivates them, and what makes them take action. From my perspective, we will inevitably be more impactful communicators if we seek the feedback and inclusion of diverse identity communities. It's really about putting people first. So thank you again for being here, and we look forward to staying in touch. Crystal, back to you. You're on mute there.
Thank you. The final unmute of this webinar. Thank you, Maria, for your reflection and your thoughts. As Maria mentioned, we're going to make this DEI Bootcamp for Communicators content available. So you can scan the QR code on the screen, bookmark that page so that it's something that you can go back to and reference or reflect on, or even share with team members and colleagues when these issues or conversations come up. We want this to be an ongoing resource that can be of value to you in your communications work. Also, we'd love to stay in contact with you, so please sign up for our Vanguard quarterly e-newsletter. You can sign up on our website, which is www.vancom.com. And that way we send out an email once a quarter, so it's not a lot of email. And we highlights different things, whether it's DEI related content, or we've been doing a lot of work around AI and communications. So lots of great insights and resources to share. So please sign up there as a way to stay connected as time moves over. So thank you again for participating. Thank you for your interest, your attention, your contributions to today's webinar, but most importantly, thank you for the work that you're doing within your organizations or in your communities related to DEI and communications. This webinar was recorded. We will be sharing the recording soon on our website, so be on the lookout for that. Also, we'll be sharing some evaluation for both the webinar as well as the DEI Bootcamp for Communicators series if you participated in that. So we would appreciate your feedback for maybe possibly doing this bootcamp again or a different type of learning series. So please, when you get those emails, respond. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And with that, thank you and have a great day.